Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm fine. Basking in our attention from the paper of record, the New York Times.
Yeah, you still pretty much swimming in serotonin there? We got a favorable review from the New York Times.
It was a very nice article, and I think she got at what, in theory, is good about this.
That we both make fools of ourselves on a more or less chronic basis.
Yeah, and we're obsessed with culture, but she failed to recognize your inherently evil, grouchy, nature. But that's
okay because some viewers have noticed it, and I'm going to be reading an email toward the end of the show, which makes a point of calling attention to it. I actually have got a little bit of a. I've gone through the euphoria, and now I think I'm kind of into the crash on the New York Times thing. I mean,
is that all there is?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, where do you go from here? I mean, favorable review in the New York Times is the whole point of any endeavor, right? I mean, unless God himself comes down and pats us on the shoulder, which I don't anticipate, I don't really see what the point of continuing is.
Well, I've always thought that. I thought your goal has always been, but I thought your goal was to create a vast network of blogging that subtly steers the course of public discourse on topics to pursue your goal of world government.
I suppose if we could save the world, that would... So, yeah. No, let's keep going.
Okay.
You make a good point. I had forgotten about saving the world.
I'm glad I bucked you up. This is a function I perform behind the scenes a lot.
You are the wind in my sails.
Bob is a high-maintenance guy.
I am.
And so am I.
Unfortunately, I have to do most of the maintenance.
Great.
What's big in the news, among other things, is the CIA.
Yeah, this is just, anytime the official spin for Porter Goss's resignation is that he was incompetent, everybody hates him, and he'd had his balls cut off by John Negroponte, you have to wonder what the real unofficial spin is.
The unofficial spin is a left-wing spin on left-wing blogs that it has to do with this burgeoning poker and prostitute scandal, right?
Right. Now, I don't know why that should be the left-wing spin, since why isn't that he's incompetent in the Bush administration?
You stole my line. The left is actually stressing the spin that does less damage to Bush. First of all, let me tell you what, I think the closest thing to the truth is probably what's on Laura Rosen's blog, War and Peace, and it comes from a congressional source, which is that Negroponte had been agitating for Goss's removal, but then when the scandal showed up and the possibility arose that, like, the number 3 guy with the wonderful name Dusty Fogo,
I think it's Fogo.
Well, I know, but I like to do the little thought experiment of which is the better name for a CIA agent, which better conveys covertness and concealment, Dusty Fogo or Foggy Dusto. And if you pronounce it Fogo, there goes that whole little amusing tangent that I just spent time on.
Suppress that thought.
So, anyway, and so Negroponte goes to Bush and says, look, if we cut this guy loose now, then as part of the regime change in the CIA, we can get rid of Dusty, and then if the scandal does hit him, he will be a former CIA guy, not a present Bush CIA guy. Bush says, okay, let's pull the trigger now. I think that's the best explanation I've heard, that it's a combination.
It's a good explanation, although it also, firing him now makes it look like he's part of this lobbyists and hookers scandal. Negroponte may have been giving advice that was in his interest, but not necessarily in Bush's best interest. If there is a scandal, Bush appear, as John Podhoretz pointed out in the NRO blog, why would Bush appear with the guy? I mean, he would just leave.
Well, Bush is an allegedly loyal person, and I think he thinks it's not some character flaw that Goss is biting the dust for, and so he feels he should pat him on the arm, which is exactly what he did.
Obviously Negroponte wants to get rid of this guy, but it's also possible that he got rid of him because he was about to be a success. I mean, that happens all the time. The National Magazine Awards are always going to editors who've just been fired, and the reason is when somebody is about to succeed, that's when his enemies have to fire him, because you kill him now or else he's going to be in forever. So I guess the most interesting theory I saw was that Goss had just won the allegiance of the CIA by punishing the leaker, Mary McCarthy, and so that's, of course, when his enemies have to kill him.
Well, but I think it's pretty much a consensus that he spent the bulk of his tenure alienating people.
Well, but it's so hard to. I mean, I that's probably true, but it's so hard to tell when you come in to reform a big bureaucracy. You always alienate the existing bureaucrats, and they always say, "Oh, you're a ham-handed bull in a china shop." Look at Kinsley in the L.A. Times.
Yeah, but first of all,
if you just read let me finish. If you just read the press on that, you would think Kinsley was evil because all these experienced Time editors disliked him. Well, the experienced Time editors were the people who were the problem, and you have to get rid of some of them, and they're going to be annoyed. So it's impossible to tell from the outside whether Goss was doing a good job.
Although now there are reports that the first thing that Hayden would do, the replacement for Goss, is in the Wall Street Journal, is rehire one of the guys who left, a guy named Cappy, K-A-P-P-E.
Well, right, and they took refuge in Negroponte's office when they fled from Porter Goss, but that doesn't mean they're right.
Well, okay, but certainly it is a widespread view in Washington among people who know a lot more than I know that Porter Goss screwed things up, and that's not some fringe lefty view. Anyway, back to your point. That is the better spin politically for the left to champion, that after 9/11, Bush installed a guy who just was wrong for the job and degraded America's intelligence gathering capabilities, which appears to be the truth. But the left is so kind of, they find scandal so alluring, I mean Bush-related scandal, that's kind of the line they're pushing.
No, I agree. Josh Marshall is a lot of fun, and he's doing great work, but he's leading the left down a path that says we should vote against Bush because he leads to hookers and prostitutes, which is not, I don't think, a line that's very substantive and is going to take.
Not hookers and prostitutes, no.
Or
one or the other.
By the way, Marshall's blog also posted something by Larry Johnson, who's vituperative against Bush and his cronies when he wants to be. And he sort of defended Porter Goss, especially in the hooker scandal. Apparently, the connection is very tenuous. There was one Porter Goss aide who was this guy Nine Fingers who played in the poker game.
Another great name.
At which there may or may not have been hookers, probably not, but so the connection between Porter Goss and the hookers is at least he's at least 2 steps removed.
Yeah.
So in Marshall's favor, he has published some, vindicating information.
And our own David Korn has been known to trot out the occasional emphasis on scandal, including this one, which he did in the last dialogue. Yeah. So, did we wrap that up or not?
I think we wrapped that up as much as we're going to.
Okay. Now, on to the subject of Iran.
Yeah.
Now, Mickey, as you know, I always try to cast Dick Cheney's behavior in a flattering light when possible, to compensate for my instinct to cast it in exactly the opposite light. But
I didn't notice that, but okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually making it up. Anyway, I'm going to need your help on this one, because I don't see a way to really justify what the guy just did. Now,
okay.
As you know, this Iran thing is kind of coming to a head. In fact, today, as we speak, the foreign ministers of the 5 members of the Security Council are meeting in New York. We're trying to get the 5 members of the Security Council to pass some kind of tough-minded resolution about Iraq and the nuclear issue, with the possibility of sanctions down the road. China and Russia are the 2 holdouts. Okay, so we're trying to get them to cooperate. Now, 4 days ago, I think, Dick Cheney delivers a speech that is a no-holds-barred attack on Russia. That it's retreated from democracy and it's using its energy resources to unfairly intimidate nations and so on. I mean, it was interpreted as a big thing here, and it was interpreted as a big thing in Russia. The press, there were references to the first shot in a new Cold War and stuff like that.
Well, so you're saying why did he go around alienating Russia right when we need them before this big vote?
Actually, I have a theory as to why he did it, but okay. Do you have a defense of that kind of behavior? I mean,
well, yeah, in the Bob Wright world, you're always sucking up to these countries. That's not necessarily the only way to get them to go along. Sometimes the way to get them to go along is to hit them over the head with a 2x4 and attack them and say, wait, and you can say, there's more where this came from, buddy. This is just our first pitch.
But Mickey,
and you're vulnerable to this attack, which they are. I'm not saying this is that it makes. I'm not saying there was the right thing to do, but there is a rationale by which, when you want somebody's vote, you attack them.
Two questions. First of all, don't you think it's pretty clear that as a domestic political matter for Putin, now that the U.S. has dissed him really conspicuously, and it's been interpreted that way, as a domestic political matter, don't you think it's going to be harder for him to be seen doing our bidding in the Security Council? Isn't that straightforward politics as it operates in every known nation?
It might work out that way. Yes, it seems most likely to work out that way.
Secondly,
they've been actually, they were at their response, which was posted on Russia's website, was very, very conciliatory.
It wasn't conciliatory.
Cheney was given their possible reactions, they said Cheney was misadvised by aides who've given him bad information. It didn't say, we're the great Satan. That could go both ways. That could mean that they...
I wouldn't call it conciliatory, personally. But anyway, my second question to you is, why do you think it is that European diplomats, who I think know this whole business better than you or me, are said to be irritated by this because they had also hoped to get Russia and China on board for the Security Council resolution? I mean,
well, it could have been a miscalculation. I'm just saying that it's not always
miscalculation.
It's not. I'm just saying that you are always pushing this thing where we have to make nicey with people.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
Okay. Okay, just in this case.
Well, in this case, in the several days leading up to the vote, yes. And also, threatening them is 100% fine, but you do it under the table. You do it in private.
That's what they said about Reagan when he gave the Evil Empire speech, and it turned out that was a fairly reasonable thing to do. Oh, you're alienating Russia. Oh, it's so terrible. Why can't you speak the truth? If the truth is Russia is using oil as a weapon, which it is, against Ukraine, why can't Cheney say that?
So you think the rule in international diplomacy should be always speak the truth, whatever's on your mind?
No, but I'm saying that your attitude is you should never speak the truth. You should always do it under the table.
No,
I'm saying sometimes
you
it
said
helps
I
to speak
say
the
that,
truth.
Ricky. I didn't say that. And in any
you said
event,
you should always make the threats under the table. We'll roll the videotape and see what you just said.
Well, no, I don't think I said you should always do that. I said I think in this case that's what you should do. In most cases, probably, and that's a fact that the Bush administration, by and large, doesn't appreciate. But I think you saying that this was possibly a misstep on Cheney's part, that is the charitable interpretation. I'm assuming this was a Cheney initiative, although it had the blessing of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to make it more likely that we'll wind up bombing Iran. It's just like Iraq. His faction within the administration is trying to systematically rule out alternatives to war. And I cannot think up another interpretation, because the guy is not so stupid. I mean, this will sound disrespectful, Mickey, but the guy's not so stupid that he's going to say what you just said, which is that, oh, no, this doesn't make it less likely that we're going to get the Security Council resolution. I mean, that's diplomacy 101. For the reasons I stated, Putin now will find it harder domestically to do our bidding. And
that's a wildly paranoid, hostile worldview, which doesn't mean it's wrong. It could easily be right.
You've been known to embrace the occasional paranoid
view.
Theory.
No. So I have no expertise to assess that. You could be right. It could be like, we didn't want to take out these guerrillas, these Al Qaeda people in northern Iraq, because that removed our cause for war, because he wanted to invade Iraq.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a similar situation.
No, it's just like, on the eve of the Iraq War, everybody was going, even people who were ambivalent were saying, well, now we have to invade. I mean, we've got all these troops here. It'll be so embarrassing if we don't invade now. In fact, it wouldn't have been, because the troops had succeeded in getting the inspectors in. But these guys, the Cheney contingent within the administration, they just rule out alternatives to war. And Bush may not realize it yet, but I think Cheney knows more than Bush does about what's going to happen in Iran, and I think this was the first step. Anyway, I would like to hear a good alternative theory about why Cheney did this, because I don't think he's this dumb when it comes to diplomacy. I really don't.
Well, he could have been sucking up to his audience, which was a bunch of, liberated Eastern European countries, I think.
He was in Lithuania. I don't think he did it on the spur of the moment.
Yeah. Okay, you could be right.
I could be.
That's Bill Clinton's favorite expression. It means, I think you're full of it.
Oh, okay.
When he says it. But
I could be right.
I really mean it, Bob. You could be right.
Okay. Now, we move on to the somewhat complicated but interesting Chris Hitchens Juan Cole face-off.
Boy, did I not see what that was about that justified all the fuss it made in the blogosphere.
The fuss made was just because it was two representative, either heroes or villains, depending on your point of view, of their respective ideologies, having a slugfest.
But they were fighting about the one point that they agree on, which is we shouldn't put that much credence in the president of Iran's threats to wipe Israel off the map, or whatever he said.
The fight was about what he said.
Both Cole and Hitchens agree that's sort of standard Iranian rhetoric, and we should put it in perspective. Yet Hitchens found some sort of mistranslation of Cole and went after him, and it's all incredibly minute.
I started out thinking it was too obscure to get into. I'm now convinced that something actually interesting is going on here.
Okay.
Which is that Cole's argument that this line that has gotten repeated so much in American media, the Ahmadinejad saying that he wants to wipe Israel off the face of the map, is at least plausibly, basically a misinterpretation of what he said, to at least a significant extent. Now, and I think Cole clearly got the better of Hitchens. Hitchens was once again shown to be intellectually sloppy, and I don't think Cole actually came out of it all that well, because he was kind of in the whole exchange with Jake Weisberg. He was once again prickly to the point of almost seeming unhinged.
Well, threatening litigation and saying that what Hitchens did was illegal, which is ridiculous.
Well, my favorite line was when he said that Chris Hitchens had clearly been put up to this by unsavory individuals. I mean, first of all, now maybe Juan Cole knows that in fact there was somebody who leaked this email of Juan Cole's to Hitchens, and so he has evidence. But if you don't have evidence and you say something like that, you come off sounding paranoid crazy. Also, I mean, the idea that Chris Hitchens needs unsavory individuals to hang on, I mean, he is an unsavory individual, and he has...
No, probably somebody just leaked it and he thought, here's a weapon I can use to bash Juan Cole, who I've been looking to bash
I mean,
for
Chris
a long time.
Hitchens has plenty of motivation and resources to go after Juan Cole without us needing a special explanation. But anyway...
But somebody did... We should say that there was Hitchens used an email that was leaked from an email group that Cole participates in, where you're not supposed to forward it to third parties. So somebody did forward it, so that's why Cole's paranoid.
Cole got all upset, and kind of doesn't understand journalism, like the difference between a reporter and commentary, and I mean, Hitchens is just a commentator. He doesn't have to call on Cole for comment.
My point is, his paranoia was sort of understandable, although how these email groups hope to keep email secret is beyond me.
Yeah, no, I thought his response was disproportionate, but I think he's basically right on the merits, and it kind of surprised me. I mean, here's the issue, and it is a little complicated.
Okay.
And so slow me down if I'm like just confusing people.
Okay.
The quote was, Ahmadinejad said, quoting, it was his quotation of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who is now dead, that as it was interpreted in the American press, Israel should be wiped off the face of the map, or something like that. Wiped off the map, the face of the earth, something. Cole said in this email that was not intended for publication, but Hitchens got a hold of, that this was really a mistranslation. And what Cole's claim is that really a better quotation is, the occupation regime over Jerusalem should vanish from the page of time. Okay, he says the whole idiom, wiped off the face of the map or whatever, wipe Israel off the map, probably doesn't even exist in Persian. Now, we'll get back to whether it matters in a while, okay? How innocuous is it really to say the occupation regime over Jerusalem should vanish from the page of time? But first, I really would like to dwell on how shoddy Hitchens' response to this is, okay? Now remember...
I thought Hitchens had a pretty good point, which is he refers to the 50-year occupation, and Israel hasn't been occupying Jerusalem for 50 years, so obviously he's referring to the existence of Israel itself.
Well, if you want to take up that point now, we can. Okay.
Wait, I can't believe you have other points. Okay.
We can take up
this
that point.
This promises to be
a little-known fact, but this is...
a 5-hour dialogue.
What?
This is going to be a 5-hour dialogue.
This is really an important and interesting issue. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're the one who brought this up, which is not central to the exposition I was laying out. But Yeah, you're right. Hitchens says, look, if he refers to something that is going on 50 years, remember, Juan Cole's argument is he just wants to, Ahmadinejad just wants to end the occupation. Chris Hitchens says, look, the occupation only dates back to 67. At one point, Ahmadinejad talks about something that's been going on for 50 years, and that's like 11 years too long or something if you're talking about 67. Well, he could have the numbers off. But there's another point I would make, and this is something you see in discourse among Palestinians, which is that you got to remember, Israel expanded in the late 1940s beyond the size of the original Israel that was defined by the United Nations. United Nations defined an Israel that was pretty small by today's standards. There was fighting. It expanded. Then there was an armistice. Now, the armistice does represent what I would call internationally recognized borders, certainly the legitimate borders I recognize. But Palestinians do, I've heard this in discourse by Hamas people, they make a distinction. Whatever the date is, 1949, whatever, they say everything since that is illegitimate. We want them to go back to the original Israel. So,
do you really think that's the Iranian position? They don't want to abolish the state of Israel and have a one-state solution?
I'm just saying that for the issue you brought up, that is sufficient to throw Hitchens' point into doubt. Okay? That takes us back well before 1967. There was an expansion of the original Israel that Palestinians consider illegitimate that took place well before 1967. Okay?
But his larger point is, get serious. Of course this guy wants to abolish Israel.
Okay, now we're back to my exposition. Thank you. But you can see that now the point you brought up is at least ambiguous, right?
Fair enough.
Okay. Now, so, and let me concede, look, I don't know if I remember to say this, but Ahmadinejad, he you probably can dig up stuff he said somewhere else that he wants to wipe out Israel. I don't deny that. But on this point, the one quote that got so much attention, I think Cole at least arguably has a point. So here's what Hitchens does, okay? Cole is contesting the mainstream interpretation, the mainstream translation of this phrase. Now, to refute him, Chris Hitchens quotes the translation in the New York Times. It's exactly what Cole is questioning, okay? You can't just repeat the translation whose legitimacy Cole is questioning and say, na, but that's what Hitchens does. Now, you can kind of tell he realizes he's on shaky ground, because he says, I'm using the translation made by Nazil Afati of the New York Times Tehran Bureau, whose Persian is probably the equal of Professor Cole's. So he knows he has to address this issue. Now, wait a second. Do we think for a second that Chris Hitchens has any idea whose Persian is better? That's a ridiculous, that's a ridiculous thing to say. He knows he's on shaky ground. Moreover, then later, so then he quotes the wiped off the map thing as if he's refuted Cole by, and then later, Hitchens even concedes a couple of paragraphs too later. Maybe this is slightly too free a translation of what he, meaning Khomeini, originally said. And then Hitchens goes through a number of translations of other statements, including one translated by the Institute for Imam Khomeini, whatever. And if you blink for a second, you won't realize what Hitchens is doing here, which he's switching from what Ahmadinejad said to things Khomeini has said. Khomeini's dead.
Ahmadinejad referred to Khomeini
He absolutely did, Mickey. Still, what's important in terms of what is on the mind of the president of Iran is how did he interpret Khomeini, right? When Ahmadinejad said, as Ayatollah Khomeini said, blank, 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 what matters is what's in the blank, 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 because that's how Ahmadinejad is interpreting him. That's what he's thinking.
Fair enough. It was clearly not the best grounds on which to attack Juan Cole.
No. Look, it is a model of either intellectual sloppiness or dishonesty. It is an embarrassment. And now let me get to.
And Cole was excitable and paranoid, so we have a standoff.
Exactly, but if the question is whether this much repeated quote is right or wrong, let me continue to contend that maybe Cole is right. Okay. Now remember, there's kind of two issues.
But Cole's defense is, I'm terrified of I'm terrified of this guy too. And what I said was in this email group, and I didn't really mean it, and it was only tentative. Well, if he's right, why does he say it was only tentative? Why doesn't he just say I was right?
Oh, his claim is that Hitchens stole his intellectual property. He was going to unveil this interpretation.
Oh, right. It was the scoop.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, can we get back to my elaborate exposition? Okay, so remember, New York mainstream there's two issues. Did he mean Israel or the occupying regime, meaning when you get a new government of Israel that withdraws the occupation, it's fine with him? And secondly, is it wipe Israel off the map, or is it vanish from the page of time? Now, it turns out, Memory, Mickey, this right-wing group that, well, I don't call them right-wing, a lot of people do, that does these translations of inflammatory Muslim documents or Arab Persian documents.
I've heard of it, yes.
Which no doubt Chris Hitchens has placed much trust in the past, because they basically see eye to eye with him ideologically. Okay.
On some issues.
It turns out, and I should add that there's a blog by a guy named Bill Scher that really helped me here and has a lot of links, and I think he makes this point about memory. It was on the Huffington Post, but he also has a blog called Liberal Oasis. If you go to the memory translation, it is the regime that is occupying Jerusalem must be eliminated from the pages of history. So on the wiped off the map thing, they are in Cole's camp. And the question becomes, Cole said vanish from the pages of time.
If you're eliminating the regime, they didn't say eliminate the occupation, they say eliminate the regime that is occupying, implies...
Well, when we said we wanted to end the regime in Iraq, did we mean we wanted to kill everyone in Iraq, Mickey?
Well, can't you wipe Israel off the face of the earth without killing everybody in Israel?
Mickey, he didn't say wipe off the face of the earth. The point is he said...
I know, but my point is you're implying that anybody's talking about killing everybody, which is that's an extraneous point. Nobody's even even the worst interpretation of what the Iranian president doesn't involve killing everybody. But when you say wipe a regime off the pages of history, that's not all that different from wiping a regime off the map.
I will pick up that point. I'm not done, but I would add that I think you're, as a matter of fact, wrong. Everyone, in the context of them developing nuclear weapons, took it to mean exactly killing pretty much everyone in Israel. That's exactly what they took it to mean.
That is a very good point, that the president of Iran's statements are interpreted in an extreme way. On the other hand, you are scared of him too, and you're scared of him for the same reasons Hitchens is scared of him, and the same reason Juan Cole is scared of him, which is all this business about the hidden imam and being bathed in light.
Mickey, could I finish with my argument? As I
You'll
said,
never finish with your argument. We'll run out of pixels on the internet before you finish your argument. I haven't gotten to the one thing that I think I alone have unearthed, okay? This is new evidence. Okay, great.
And again, my aims are confined to clarifying what the guy actually said and showing that Cole is right and Hitchens is once again embarrassingly wrong. Now, if you go to this memory document, and I should stipulate that if you go to this memory document, you'll find a claim up at the top where they paraphrase Ahmadinejad at this very speech as like encouraging people to say death to Israel or something. May be true, and again, I don't doubt that he wants it, but I'm focusing on this one phrase. If you go to this memory document, the big question, we've agreed that Cole is right, Hitchens is wrong about pages of history versus wipe off the map. The question is, what does it mean to remove a regime, an occupying regime, from the pages of history, okay? Now, the one thing that I don't think has been brought out is in this document, as translated by memory, Ahmadinejad draws an analogy with the Soviet Union. He says, nobody believed that we would one day witness the collapse of the Eastern imperialism, and as memory notes in parentheses, that means the USSR. They said it was an iron regime. But in our short lifetime, we have witnessed how this regime collapsed in such a way that we must look for it in libraries, and we can find no literature about it. So, first of all, he's back to this vanishing from the pages of history metaphor. And clearly, what happened with the Soviet Union was Russia still existed. Nobody had to die in Russia. We had a change of regime that led them to withdraw from the occupying territory. So, he is actually pretty explicit in elucidating the meaning of this quotation.
Well, that's indeed fascinating, but it's a little raw because he's saying that Russia is only found in the pages of history in the libraries, not that it's been wiped off the pages of history. It's still there in the pages of history.
But Mickey...
So his metaphor doesn't completely work. I accept your interpretation. This is all very, very tedious, and I don't understand the point of it all.
Mickey, our policy is being shaped right now in a significant way by the translation of a particular phrase that it turns out is probably wrong. Now, I'm not saying that that's like, that overhauls my view of what has to be done, but it seems to me that accurate translation of inflammatory or potentially inflammatory things in a situation like this, is important enough that, and by the way, you're the one who wanted to do this issue. I didn't. I said I don't want it. You said, let's do Cole versus Hitchens. So I actually read up on it.
Okay,
And Hitchens is wrong and Cole is right. And now you're complaining that it's tedious and trivial. But it's actually not trivial whether the mainstream press is getting the story right or wrong. They got it, at least to some extent, significantly wrong.
Fair enough, but my point, I'm referring to the larger truth that both Hitchens and Cole are on the let's not start a war with Iran front, and they both have pretty much the same view of the leader of Iran. They're sort of scared of him because of this 12th Imam stuff, and so do you. So basically everybody agrees, and this is like faculty politics.
It's not like faculty politics. There's a very important issue here.
Yeah.
I
accept your translation.
What?
I accept your refinement of the standard translation.
Well, you accept Juan Cole's. That's harder for you to say, isn't it?
Well, no, I thought Juan Cole was slightly too favorable, but the truth is somewhere in between.
Well, I was very skeptical because he
Cole
does read his ideology into his analysis sometimes, it seems to me. And I still, it's not 100% black and white. I just think the facts are on Cole's side on balance.
I thought the truth seemed to be closer to Cole than to Hitchens, but it was all an unnecessary attack by Hitchens, and since they on the one issue where he agrees with the guy, anyway.
Well, I'm exhausted, Mickey. I'm going to take a nap. Can you carry it from
you
here?
can take a nap while I carry the ball on the next one.
What is it we're doing next?
Next, we're talking about the Daily Kos article in the Washington Post. It's his standard rap where the net roots, which is the whatever internet enabled faction of the Democratic Party that Marcos Mulitsas claims to represent, doesn't like Hillary. They mainly don't like Hillary because of the Iraq War, but they broaden it into a general critique of the Clinton presidency was a disaster, and because it ignored and belittled the activist left, and although he has to concede that 8 years of peace and prosperity wasn't such a bad thing, nevertheless Hillary is the vessel of this insidious centrist Clintonism that he's fighting against, and woe be the Democrat who tries to pawn this off into the Democratic Party. The problem, of course, is that A, Mulitsas has never won an election with his fabled net roots. B, his candidate...
Who has never won an election?
Marcos Mulitsas. He's 0 for 30 or something.
You mean as an official campaign advisor?
Yes, and as throwing the weight of the net roots behind candidates, the candidates that he throws his weight behind don't win.
That is a relevant statistic.
And when the Howard Dean volunteers came to Iowa, they alienated everybody and got John Kerry nominated, to be the Democratic nominee. So his record is as unblemished by success. And what that piece sort of told me is that the net roots have become just another interest group in the Democratic Party that sort of stands in the way of winning elections, like labor unions, like the Affirmative Action Caucus. They're part of the problem. The way to get around the problem is to empower the center the same way he has empowered the left by blowing up the party system and having a third centrist party that uses the web to create a party on a laptop. I don't understand what everything a party does for you can sort of do on the web now, and so have somebody run as a third party and marginalize these Daily Kos people. How about that for a theory?
Whatever you say. You know more about this stuff than I do. I mean, I was struck a little by the kind of irony of, like, one person speaking for the net roots. I mean, I thought the whole idea behind net roots is that they're diffuse and it's the grassroots speaking, and it's gone are the days when one person presumes to speak for a,
Very good point. I think you're right. But I think the Netroots will, they're not like Reverend Dobson's followers who will allegedly follow his word. I mean, they'll give him grief if they disagree with him.
Although the people, all those tons of people who post those messages and Kos must have a lot of respect for him. I also thought it was kind of funny who he mentioned and didn't mention as Democratic possibilities. He mentioned Mark Warner, which I was tempted to think was disingenuous. I mean, do you see any possibility of him trying to throw the grassroots weight toward Warner?
Well, sure, because Warner has the luxury of not having had to vote on Iraq, so he can pull a Clinton and pretend,
but he's certainly not being
that he would have been
depicted
against
as a classic lefty progressive of the kind you see on the Kos site mostly, right?
That's true.
He mentions Russ Feingold, which makes more sense.
Right.
He doesn't mention Al Gore, which is interesting because it's thought that Gore is the one guy who could come on the scene immediately and make it with a big footprint and possibly capture the Netroots, right?
I agree, and I think he is the guy. And the Wall Street Journal had a piece recently, it might even have been today, about how Gore is in fact making noises about running. So you heard it here first. And clearly the people who hate Hillary on the left because of Iraq, Gore is their guy. They don't think they're going to run Russ Feingold against Hillary and beat her. They think Gore is going to beat her. And he might.
Yeah.
That might not be a bad thing.
No, I think Gore may be the one person who could and could beat her, and I think he'd have a better chance of winning the general. But we gave our advice to Gore last time.
Yes.
And if he wasn't watching then, it's his problem. We're not going to spend valuable blogging heads time repeating ourselves for people who don't tune into every episode.
But I do think the party and a laptop idea is not dead. And there's a huge hole in the center of American politics that actually Hillary is trying to fill, but she may not get the nomination. Maybe Hillary should form a third party.
Well, if you mean in the center, though, there are powerful forces in the Democratic Party trying to fill it. I mean, you would think that a party and a laptop will arise to fill some empty niche.
What forces in the center of the Democratic Party are trying?
DLC? I don't know. Don't they have?
I don't sense the DLC is at the top of its power arc.
No.
I sense that the DLC is.
But I mean, Hillary
less...
is the presumptive favorite, and you're right. She's the center, right?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, why doesn't Kos start his own political party on the left?
No. Well, I don't quite understand why American politics isn't going to fragment it with like 4 third-party candidates. The obstacles to starting a third-party candidacy seem to have gotten so much smaller than they used to be.
Absolutely.
You have to file in 50 states and get on the ballot and organize people through the web, and boom, you have your party. And you raise money instantly. So why won't we see a situation where there are 3 or 4 third parties?
He could come out tomorrow, Kos, that is, and say, I'm starting a party, and it would be a significant event.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And it would be interesting to find out why he doesn't. But I have one other question about him. What's the deal with the suffix Zuniga? Sometimes it appears after his last name, sometimes it doesn't. It had been appearing, it's on the cover of his book, then in this Washington Post piece it didn't. Did he marry somebody and get divorced? What?
I haven't the faintest idea.
It's not the actress Daphne Zuniga, I think, though.
It is. I very much doubt it's the actress Daphne Zuniga.
Could be, though. She's getting politically active, but I think it's not her.
She always has been.
Right.
But no, I think you've.
I've hit on the most important issue we've addressed today.
Yes. Okay. With her Daphne Zuniga. Okay. I want to make it's a point that's sort of similarly fuzzy and futuristic, which is the issue of dual citizenship and people voting as expatriates. I've always thought this was a terrible thing. It's a definite trend in the world. I mean, the Berlusconi is out as prime minister in Italy because Italian expatriates, some of whom are American citizens and citizens of Australia, voted in the election. And there's a guy from Chicago who's now a member of the Italian Senate. There's a guy from some city in Australia, I think Brisbane, And all these people, they're American citizens, they're Australian citizens, but they get to vote in Italy and get to decide. The more obvious, important trend is Mexico. Mexico made a concerted effort to actually become closer to Mexican expatriates, some of whom were Mexican citizens, and even the children of Mexican expatriates, who were the children who were born in America, are under some promised interpretations allowed to vote in Mexican elections. I always said this was a terrible idea. It leads to divided loyalties. How it throws a monkey wrench into the process of assimilation. If people still think they're Mexicans to some extent, are they going to be 100% good Americans? There was an interesting article
You sound like you're building up to a dramatic change of heart, by the way.
Well, the dramatic change of heart would be, there's this article in the San Diego Tribune saying, hey, we want these people to vote in Mexican elections because they're the most pro-American voters. They're the people who might bring about the economic reform that we want in Mexico. So it's a good thing if they vote. Similarly, maybe, the Italian voters exercised a good effect on the elections, and maybe we're evolving toward a world where everybody votes in 2 or 3 countries, just the way, people in Washington, D.C. vote in the elections in Bethany Beach, Delaware, where they have resort homes. Maybe Americans vote in Italian elections, the way that they handle Italy as sort of the resort that they came from. And this might, in some Bob Wright sense, lead to a sort of interlocking affiliations that lead to more cosmopolitan global government. I mean, it's not it just seems to be an interesting trend. A, it's an interesting trend, and B, it's interesting that maybe it's not an evil trend. I think it probably is an evil trend.
Oh, I thought you'd warmed up to it.
I've warmed up to it a bit, but I mean, I have an open mind, but.
Well, I never thought about it until you emailed me about it. I don't have a fixed position. I mean, it seems to me a little dubious in that it's kind of, there's going to be a great disproportion in terms of which countries Americans have, like, dual voting rights in, or people in America have dual voting rights in, right? I mean, American voters. Like, it's
right.
It's not going to be, like, equally spread around the world. There's going to be a whole lot from Mexico, a whole lot from a few other countries, and the question becomes, what's non-arbitrary about that? Why should those particular countries have a claim on a disproportionate share of the American electorate and other countries not, kind of? That's just my first reaction.
No, it's America has a disproportionate share of their electorate.
Well, but it's going to work both ways, right? I mean, you're just saying as a general principle.
Well, we're not going to let Italians vote in our elections.
Oh, so you're saying it would only work one way?
Well, in any case, it'd be trivial because the number of Americans moving to Italy and becoming Italian seems tiny.
Well, still,
tiny,
it's
tiny.
pretty Bush-esque to endorse it only in asymmetrical form.
But in practice, it's asymmetrical because we're the destination.
But what is your in-principle
immigrants.
position?
But the other point is it leads to a definition of of where you can vote that's based entirely on ethnicity and sort of genetic heritage. So the children of Mexican Americans, even if they've never set foot in Mexico, because they look Mexican and their parents were Mexican, suddenly get voting rights in Mexico. That doesn't seem like a very good principle to establish. So that's the other problem with it. And the third problem is that the numbers aren't important enough. I mean, American expatriates happen to have held the balance of power in Italian elections, and maybe Mexican expatriates in America would hold the balance of power in the Mexican elections, but that's going to be a rare case. Usually, the numbers are so small that they're not going to make a difference.
And what is the deal with these 4 million people from Mexico in America who can vote in Mexican elections? What is their status here? They're not all citizens of America, right?
Some are, some aren't.
But they're all legal, first of all.
They're all legal?
I'm asking you. I mean, they either have green cards or...
I assume that all the ones who can officially go up and vote in the polling stations or mail in their ballots, I think, are are legal in some way. And also, they're not participating. And this guy Mundell, who said it was a good thing, was lamenting the fact that obstacles have in fact been erected to their participation.
They're not participating in the Mexican election by and large. There are not many of them taking advantage of the opportunity.
Very, very few of them. It's tiny. And that's either because they're not interested or because obstacles have been erected in their path.
Okay.
Or because the vast majority are illegal and wouldn't qualify.
Okay.
But so it's not a major practical factor. I just thought it was an interesting sort of libertarian view of the world where everybody's, can vote in any country they have chosen to have affiliations with.
I think if you're going to think about it strictly, you should think about it as a symmetrical principle, and then you'll see how, from a certain point of view, it may make less sense.
It makes no sense from many points of view. That's one of them, yes. Okay.
Okay. On to viewer email. First of all, Mickey, cafepress.com is apparently open for business. There's Bloggingheads TV paraphernalia with several slogans. There's T-shirts. There's mugs.
Cool.
Greg Dingle took care of this. And I... you should go take a look. We'll link to it. It's cafepress.com/bloggingheads. You can actually buy stuff. And it seems to me it looks pretty good. I mean, right now it's just like white T-shirts and white coffee mugs and one beer stein. I mean, Greg chose to put the phrase "deploy the moose" on the beer stein, not the coffee mugs, and I think that makes sense because if you ask yourself when would I be likely to yell "deploy the moose," it would probably be after you had had a few beverages, don't you think?
Probably, but who gets the filthy lucre from this? Who gets the money?
We do. This is our first source of revenue, but our markup was modest. Greg was disappointed. He wanted like a 50% markup, and it's lower. I don't know honestly what it is. I think it's like 25%. Is that too low?
No, that sounds about right. But it's my experience on starting one of these is that I wouldn't count on this revenue source to buy you a new house.
Yeah, but your stuff said kausfiles on it, right?
Well, I'm thinking when we started Carrie Haters for Carrie, we had a Cafe Press site.
Oh, I see. But this is Bloggingheads. We've been reviewing the New York Times.
Made us a couple $100.
I'm thinking we can retire probably after this.
It's a great thing.
Okay.
People should go and buy the place up.
A little viewer email, Mickey.
Okay.
From David R. Having read about Bloggingheads TV in the New York Times, I went to the site. When I clicked to play one of the dialogues, David, that's dialogues, it said no application was chosen for that type. Did I want to use Windows Media Player? When I said yes, it started that application, which promptly displayed this error message, quote, one or more arguments are not valid. Then in a sly critique of the quality of our argumentation, David asks, how did it know? Ha ha ha. Very funny, David. Okay, from Pat M. On our discussion, I guess you at some point said the problem with education is teachers' union. She said, Bob, please at least note some sort of disagreement when Mickey goes so shallow in his thinking that unions become a scapegoat for decades of legislative failure. Mickey, I do think you have a tendency to single out a few liberal bogeymen and blame lots of problems on them. And I will say that I have personal experience in the public schools. I have a daughter in an elementary public school and one in a middle school. And I can say both unions are not an insurmountable obstacle to good education, and that getting rid of the unions would not be a cure-all. You probably won't disagree with either of those, but the elementary school teachers are really, really good, notwithstanding the fact that they're unionized and, in fact, have been on strike. And the reason is it's a really good principal, does a good job of hiring them. Junior high teachers are not good, and I think the main reason is the principal doesn't do a good job of hiring them. And they're at least not consistently good. There are some really great teachers. But
usually when people say, my high school has a really good principal, it means my principal is really good at pawning off the bad teachers on other schools, not firing them because they can't be fired, but pawning them off on other schools where a bad principal has to accept them because the union contract says they have to get a job somewhere.
But they don't get immediate.
So your good principal is usually at the expense of some poor sucker school on the other side of town who gets the bad apples that your principal's rejected. Every teacher I've talked to says the teachers' union is a problem. We've been throwing money at the schools for decades without too much effect, and it's pretty clear that the reason is that we're spending the money badly. We're spending the money on the existing poor teachers as opposed to hiring good new teachers.
Well, first of all, they don't get immediate tenure, right? Isn't there a trial
They get
period?
very quick tenure. I think it's 6 months in California.
Well, probably varies by state. Anyway, I'm here to tell you that a lot of money is
Excuse me, let me finish. Schwarzenegger proposed to extend it to 2 years, and the teachers' union launched a huge campaign to stop it. So, there's the effect of your unions.
Well, I'm here to tell you a lot of the problem, anyway, is not unions. I can personally attest.
Look, there are a lot of good auto workers, too. It just so happens that all the unionized auto companies are going broke, and all the non-union companies are doing fine. And when you buy a car, you don't buy one from a unionized company, do you, Bob? You buy one from a non-unionized company. Unions are a problem. They make it very hard to fire incompetents. They put procedural obstacles in the way of any work rule changes. They just gum up the works. They're not particularly suited for the fast-moving Internet age. As Robert Wright, Clinton's Secretary of Labor, once admitted.
R-E-I-C-H.
Right.
The guy once called me and interviewed me for like half an hour he was going to do a profile on me. It turned out he thought I was Robert Reich.
Everybody knows you're the president of NBC.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hew to my, at some point you got to focus on the big issues. And
I'm
the
telling
big
you, there's
issue
still
in
be
the
a lot of
Democratic
issues
Party.
left if you got rid of unions, because you can see at schools there's a lot of other problems.
I'm not saying there are not a lot of other problems. I'm not saying you can't, through Herculean effort, have a good school with unions. I'm saying that unions are a big obstacle to fixing the schools. The Democratic Party won't admit it. Somebody has to. It's a big issue.
I don't know that that's true, that unions in all forms and of all kinds would be, but I have not done enough research. Final piece of viewer email. Begins, Mickey Kaus is enjoyable to watch, but Robert Wright has a prickly, unpleasant personality. He comes across as rude and dismissive and almost uninterested in the other's ideas.
That was a paragraph that I think actually got cut out of the New York Times. He meant to say that, I think.
He goes on. Why have the talk if he's going to be so overbearing, sarcastic, accusatory, and rude, and so on? Wright seems more interested in trying to win, in quotation marks, the argument. An occasional smile wouldn't hurt either. It's from Scott W. Scott, listen, I'm afraid I cannot help you on the smile front. I would take the quotation marks off of win. I'm not trying to win arguments. I'm trying to win arguments. And Mickey, more seriously, I must concede that all the properties he attributes to me, overbearing, sarcastic, rude, and so on, do emerge in dialogues with you, and yet do not emerge in dialogues with other people, such as Eric, David, and Matt. Now,
because you agree with them.
Well, this guy pats you on the back for having as I type this, I'm listening to the Kaus-Goldberg dialogue. This one is nice and pleasant. Two good-natured guys talking and disagreeing, but it is cordial. And there seems to be a genuine conversation, blah, blah, blah. You guys weren't disagreeing significantly. So...
We disagreed a little.
What?
We disagreed a little.
No, you didn't disagree on policy. And this brings me to one theory about why you bring out the worst in me, which I think you actually do. And it may be good for, ratings or something, and I'm happy to take a bullet for the site and look like a jerk and so on, as I think I've demonstrated. But I do think part of what drives me nuts about you is that you won't admit that you are a conservative. And it's what drives a lot of people nuts about you. And your dialogue with Jonah is a perfect example. As you may recall, before your dialogue, I said, try to find something to disagree about. You did not disagree, as I recall, about a single policy issue. You had divergent analyses of what's wrong with the Republican Party.
Well, but if we talked about national health care and all sorts of issues...
Why didn't you talk about something you disagree on? You said in an email you would try to find something to disagree on.
Because it wasn't in the news. I'm sorry, Bob, I failed to carry out your orders to perfection.
Another viewer at one point suggested that you and I discuss why you're not a Republican. We don't have time, but that has got to be put on the back burner because it is an interesting question. The other thing I would say about this unfortunately accurate characterization of the way I come off on the show is that I think you accentuate these qualities in me by making a point to sound reasonable and conciliatory, more so than you are in real life. And Lisa, I think, my wife...
I have no life aside from this, Bob. This is my real life.
I want you to know, Mickey, that Lisa, whose judgment you probably respect more than mine, she shares the suspicion that you're making a point to come off as reasonable and conciliatory on this show. And we think it may be a cynical ploy. Reasonableness as a cynical and corrupt strategy.
That's my whole plan. It's to make me look good and make you look like a jerk.
What's working?
It's diabolical.
Diabological.
But I'm happy to explain why I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat because I'm for government activism and spending taxpayers' money and doing good things that help achieve the society we need.
Just out of curiosity, what form of government activism?
Healthcare. For one, I'm for all sorts of
single payer.
Maybe if necessary, sure. I sort of like Medicare. It seems to work. Why not extend it to everybody?
Okay.
That's my baseline position.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm for publicly funded education. I'm for all sorts of government programs, that Social Security that have been cemented into place and are uncontroversial. I don't want to roll back the clock on them. The other question is, why don't some of these liberal Republicans come to the center and join one of these centrist third parties in a laptop? It's not particularly relevant.
Okay.
Which of the existing outdated slots different people fit into?
Okay, but if we have time, the question to pursue, and we can pursue this at another date, is then why on your blog is it so clear that you actually want Democrats to lose, Republicans to win? You have no inclination to ridicule Democrats, Republicans by and large. It's Democrats, it's liberals, and that is where your heart is, and that's clear, and I doubt you'll deny it. Will you deny it?
No, I admit that. So what?
Well, it must signify something. It's a puzzle if you're really a liberal.
I'm more annoyed by liberals than conservatives.
It's because you love them so much that you want them to be better.
I have higher expectations. That's my surface excuse. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's
not going
my
to get
rationale.
very far in these quarters, but
that's the official rationale.
Okay.
But I'm happy to talk about this because it's talking about me.
Of course you're happy to talk about it because you're conciliatory and reasonable, and I'm not, and that's your whole shtick.
Yeah, well, the camera brings out the truth.
Camera doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Doesn't blink.
So there you go.
So that about wraps it up, I guess.
I think so. We're approaching an hour, so I think we should relieve our viewers of the need to watch us.
Okay.
See you next time.
I'm with you. See you around.
Okay, bye.